The morning of June 25th, 1876, dawned hot and still over the rolling plains of Montana. Thousands of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho families rested under the summer sun in a sprawling encampment along the Little Bighorn River. Horses grazed lazily, children splashed in the shallows, and the scent of roasting buffalo drifted through the air. Elders swapped stories while warriors sharpened weapons. But there was little sense of urgency. They didn't know that the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, led by the ambitious and battle-hungry Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, was closing in. With swords gleaming and rifles ready, Custer and his 700 men believed they were on the verge of a decisive victory. By sunset, however, the valley would become the site of one of the most stunning military upsets in history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, or as the Lakota call it, Greasy Grass. Custer, a former Civil War hero and self-styled Indian fighter, had been tracking these hostile bands for weeks, determined to force them onto reservations. But what he expected to be a routine skirmish turned into a nightmare. The encampment was far larger than anticipated, with an estimated 7,000 people, including 1,500 to 2,500 battle-hardened warriors. Custer's native scouts warned him that this was no ordinary village. It was a war-ready force. But Custer, convinced of his own brilliance, ignored them. With his trademark bravado, he split his forces into 3 groups and declared, "Hurrah, boys, we've got them!" That confidence didn't last long. Crazy Horse, Gall, and other legendary war leaders quickly organized a counterattack. Utilizing the terrain, the warriors flanked Custer's men, swarming them with arrows and bullets. Many fought on horseback, darting through enemy lines in daring charges. The cavalry's rigid formations proved useless against the fluid, fast-moving assault. By the time the dust settled, Custer and all 210 men under his direct command lay dead. A complete massacre. The total U.S. casualty rate was a shocking 52%, while native losses were fewer than 100. When news of the battle reached the American public, it sent shockwaves through the nation. Newspapers turned Custer into a tragic hero, a fallen martyr. But for the native nations, this was more than just a victory. It was proof of their strength, unity, and ability to stand against impossible odds. We must rewind to the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie to understand the battle. Signed after years of conflict, the agreement promised the Lakota Sioux exclusive ownership of the Black Hills, a sacred region they called Paha Sapa, along with vast hunting rights across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. But peace lasted only until 1874, when Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills and announced the discovery of gold. Prospectors flooded the region, violating the treaty and trampling native sovereignty. The U.S. government, eager to cash in, offered to buy the Black Hills for $6 million. When Lakota leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse refused, President Ulysses S. Grant resorted to coercion. In December 1875, the Bureau of Indian Affairs ordered all free-roaming tribes to relocate to reservations by January 31st, 1876, an impossible deadline during Montana's brutal winter. Those who stayed were labeled hostile, and the Army mobilized to crush them. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, the betrayal was personal. The Black Hills weren't just land. They were the spiritual heart of their world. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota holy man, had long warned of the settlers' greed. His visions now urged resistance. Meanwhile, Crazy Horse, an Oglala Lakota war leader, rallied fighters with his reputation for daring tactics. Together, they became the soul of a growing alliance, one determined to protect their way of life, even if it meant war. It's spring 1876. The Powder River Basin isn't just a stretch of wilderness, it's a refuge. Thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho families, fed up with broken treaties and empty threats, have gathered here like storm clouds. They're done playing by the U.S. government's rigged rules. Teepees rise in clusters, children laugh as they chase dogs through the grass, and worries by firelight. At the center of it all, Sitting Bull, a buzzing hive of defiance. This isn't a random meetup. It's a movement. It's now June. The air crackles with tension. Sitting Bull, the spiritual rock of the resistance, decides it's time for a sun dance, a ritual so intense it'd make your average gym routine look like a nap. He dances under the blistering sun for days, refusing food or water. Then, in a moment of raw devotion, he slashes his arms 100 times and dances until his body gives out. When he wakes, he's got a vision to share. Soldiers falling from the sky, like grasshoppers upside down, their boots kicking at nothing. To his people, this isn't a hallucination. It's a prophecy. The universe itself promises victory. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army's cooking up a plan so cocky, it belongs in a Wild West parody. 3 generals, Alfred Terry, with Custer in tow, George Crook, and John Gibbon, are marching from the east, south, and west, aiming to squeeze the tribes in a 3-pronged campaign of convergence. Think of it like a giant bear trap snapping shut, except the bear's already awake. Now, let's talk about Crazy Horse. On June 17th, the Oglala Lakota war leader spots Crook's troops lumbering through the Rosebud Valley. Does he panic? Nope. He grins. With a force of 1,500 warriors, he launches a fierce surprise attack that sends Crook's men scrambling backward like startled raccoons. Guns blaze, horses rear, and Crook's mighty campaign is reduced to a retreat by day's end. The tribes? They've bought themselves precious time, and they're not wasting it. The camps pack up and move to the Little Bighorn River, where the water runs clear, and the grass grows tall. This isn't a random relocation. It's a strategic masterstroke. The river offers fresh resources, and the valley's natural contours make defending it easier. Teepees multiply until the village stretches for miles, a mobile city of 8,000 people, guarded by leaders who've outsmarted invaders. Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg later said, "We were not expecting trouble, but we were ready." Cue Custer's ego. By June 24th, Custer's 7th Cavalry prowls the hills above the Little Bighorn. Through his field glasses, he spots the village. Does he see a thriving community of families, elders, and warriors? Nah. He sees hostiles as a golden ticket to fame. Ignoring orders to wait for Terry's main column, he attacks. Why? Ambition, arrogance, and a hefty dose of delusion. He splits his 600 troops into 3 groups, convinced he'll swoop in, scatter the natives, and ride home a hero. On June 25th, Custer charges toward the village expecting chaos. Instead, he finds organized fury. Warriors mount up not in panic, but with precision. Crazy Horse leads a flanking charge so swift, it's like watching lightning split the sky. Gall, the Hunkpapa Lakota commander, shreds Custer's left flank. And Sitting Bull? He's everywhere at once, rallying fighters, shouting orders, embodying the prophecy. By sunset, Custer and every last soldier in his battalion are dead. The remaining troops under Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen hunkered down on a hilltop, pinned by gunfire for 2 days. But here's the twist. The tribes choose to withdraw. Scouts have spotted Terry's reinforcements thundering toward them, and the people know this battle is over. But the war, it's only the beginning. Sitting Bull wasn't your typical war chief. He didn't wear elaborate war bonnets or boast about his kills. Instead, the 45-year-old Hunkpapa Lakota leader carried a stone-headed war club and a pipe adorned with feathers, symbolizing his role as a Witcheshawakan, holy man. His power came from visions, not violence. In 1876, his reputation as a spiritual guide drew thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho to his camp. They trusted his prophecy. The Great Spirit will deliver our enemies into our hands. On the other side was George Armstrong Custer, a man who lived for violence and headlines. The flamboyant 36-year-old Civil War veteran had graduated last in his class at West Point, but became the Union's youngest brigadier general at 23. Nicknamed Son of the Morning Star by tribes for his dawn attacks, Custer's ambition often overruled strategy. In 1874, his Black Hills expedition made him famous. But by 1876, he was desperate to revive his fading career. His plan? A quick, brutal strike at Little Bighorn to outshine his rivals, General Terry and Colonel Gibbon. The two leaders couldn't have been more different. Sitting Bull sought to preserve a way of life. Custer craved a legacy. Their clash was inevitable. Custer's 7th Cavalry reached the Little Bighorn Valley on June 24, 1876. Scouts reported a massive village, over 1,000 lodges, but Custer dismissed their warnings. Convinced surprise would guarantee victory, he split his 700 troops into 3 groups. Major Marcus Reno, 175 men, to attack the southern end of the camp, Captain Frederick Benteen, 125 men, to block escape routes to the east, and Custer himself, 210 men, to strike the northern flank. The plan relied on the tribes fleeing in panic. Instead, they fought back hard. At 3 p.m. on June 25th, Reno charged the southern tip of the village. Women and children scrambled to safety as warriors, many fresh from the Rosebud fight, mounted a fierce counterattack. Lakota fighter Rain in the Face recalled, "We rode straight at them, yelling. Their horses panicked, and so did they." Reno's men retreated to a nearby bluff, where Benteen's battalion joined them. They spent the next 36 hours under siege, low on ammunition and water. Custer, meanwhile, pushed north. Unaware of Reno's route, he ordered his men down a ravine toward the river, straight into a trap. Cheyenne warriors under Lame White Man and Two Moons flanked the cavalry, while Crazy Horse's Oglala Lakota circled behind them. By 4:30 p.m., Custer's forces were surrounded on what's now called Last Stand Hill. The final moments of Custer's battalion remain shrouded in myth, but native accounts paint a vivid picture. As the cavalry dismounted to form a defensive line, warriors closed in. Gall, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader whose family was killed in Reno's initial attack, led a furious charge up the hill. "I rode my horse right over the soldiers," he later said. "Their bullets couldn't stop us." Crazy Horse, stripped to his breechcloth and war paint, darted through the chaos on his fast-moving pinto horse. Using decoys to lure soldiers into the open, his warriors picked off stragglers. Lakota and Cheyenne fighters, armed with repeating rifles and bows, outgunned the cavalry's single-shot Springfield carbines. By sunset, Custer and his men were dead. Across the river, Reno and Benteen's battalions huddled on their bluff, listening to the gunfire fade. They didn't know Custer had fallen until scouts spotted the bodies 2 days later. The tribes, meanwhile, dismantled their 8,000-person camp and scattered. They knew the army's retaliation would be swift. The aftermath was a propaganda nightmare for the U.S. newspapers, called the battle a massacre, erasing Native strategy and valor. Yet the victory was short-lived. Within a year, the Army flooded the plains with troops, starving tribes into surrender by destroying bison herds and burning villages. Sitting Bull fled to Canada, while Crazy Horse surrendered in 1877, only to be bayoneted to death under questionable circumstances. When news of Custer's defeat reached the East on July 4, 1876, America's centennial exploded like a cannon blast. Newspapers screamed headlines like "Massacre" and "Custer slain," framing the battle as a brutal ambush by savages. The New York Herald declared, "No more merciless or inhuman foe ever roamed the plains than the Red Devils who murdered Custer." Public outrage fueled demands for revenge. Politicians doubled down on funding for the Indian Wars, and recruitment posters urged young men to avenge Custer. But the real story was far more complex. Native fighters had followed the rules of war. They targeted soldiers, spared women and children, unlike U.S. campaigns, and retreated when reinforcements arrived. Even General Terry, who reached the battlefield on June 27th, admitted in his report that the tribes fought with courage and skill. Yet the myth of Custer's last stand took root. Artists like Edgar Paxson painted dramatic scenes of the general surrounded by warriors, cementing him as a tragic hero. Lost in the noise? The fact that Native leaders had outthought, outmaneuvered, and outright beaten the U.S. Army. The government's retaliation was swift. By August 1876, Congress seized the Black Hills, ignoring the Fort Laramie Treaty, and cut off rations to tribes until they surrendered. Over 3,000 soldiers flooded into the region, torching villages and slaughtering bison herds to starve the Lakota into submission. Sitting Bull refused to back down, telling his people, "The white man knows how to make everything, but he does not know how to distribute it." The triumph at Little Bighorn bought the tribes time, but not freedom. By 1877, most Lakota and Cheyenne bands had surrendered. Crazy Horse, lured into Fort Robinson under a flag of truce, was killed in a scuffle with guards on September 5, 1877. His father later said, "They could not kill him in battle, so they murdered him with lies." Sitting Bull fled to Canada, but returned in 1881 to face imprisonment. The U.S. government's next weapon was paperwork. The 1887 Dawes Act dissolved tribal land ownership, parceling reservations into individual plots. Of 150 million acres promised to tribes in treaties, 90 million were stripped away by 1934. Meanwhile, bison, once numbering 30 million, were reduced to fewer than 1,000 by 1889, destroying the Plains tribe's food source and spiritual connection to the land. Children became targets, too. Boarding schools, like Pennsylvania's Carlisle Indian Industrial School, founded in 1879, forced Native kids to abandon their languages and traditions. "Kill the Indian, save the man," said founder Richard Pratt. By 1900, 20,000 children had been taken from their families. The goal? Erase Indigenous identity. For decades, Hollywood whitewashed the battle. In 1941's They Died with Their Boots On, Errol Flynn played Custer as a noble martyr. Native characters? They were barely visible. Even today, many textbooks frame the clash as a last stand, rather than a strategic Native victory. But cracks in the myth began showing. In 1970, Little Big Man flipped the script, portraying Custer as a delusional egomaniac. Museums started revising exhibits, And in 1991, the National Park Service renamed the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, adding memorials to Native warriors. Oral histories from Lakota and Cheyenne elders, once ignored, now shape the narrative. Historian D. Brown wrote in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, "The Indians knew what was happening. They were fighting for survival." Pop culture still struggles with the truth. A 1996 TNT movie depicted Sitting Bull as a side character until Native consultants walked off set. "We're not set dressing," said Lakota advisor Leonard Littlefinger. "This is our story." The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho fight for the Black Hills today. In 1980, the Supreme Court ruled the U.S. stole the land illegally and offered $106 million in compensation. The tribes refused. "The Black Hills are not for sale," said Lakota activist Charlotte Black Elk. The fund, now worth over $1 billion, sits untouched. Little Bighorn's legacy lives in modern protests, too. At Standing Rock in 2016, thousands rallied against the Dakota Access Pipeline, echoing their ancestors' defiance. "We are the protectors," said Lakota elder David Archambault II. This is not new for us. The battle also reshaped military policy. After 1876, the Army abandoned large cavalry charges against Native fighters, adopting guerrilla tactics instead. Historians call Little Bighorn the peak of Plains resistance, proof that unity could topple an empire. As the sun sets over the Little Bighorn battlefield, stone markers dot the hills. White for soldiers, red for warriors. The wind carries echoes of war cries, gunfire, but also songs of survival. Greasy Grass isn't just a battle for the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. It's a reminder that they're still here. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.